Welcome to the Probate Nation. Our goal each time you visit our show is to inform, highlight, and educate you about the issues, challenges, and pitfalls you may face, whether you are probating the estate of a loved one who has passed away, or you have assumed the awesome responsibility of managing the finances and care of an aging adult as a conservator and guardian in what we call the living probate. Our show today focuses on the living probate and the one way some folks are coping with and paying for long-term care. We have been hearing for many years about the high cost of long-term care. Insurance companies sold long-term care insurance policies over the years. While some folks purchased that coverage, many folks did not. In your role as a conservator of an aging adult, if there is no long-term care insurance to cover those costs, then you may have to seek assistance from the government program called Medicaid. There are many facets of Medicaid, but we will focus this show on adult long-term care. Qualifying for that adult long-term care Medicaid in Virginia can be challenging, as there are very specific criteria that must be met. Our program today introduces you to that process as we discuss the criteria to be met, planning that can be done to meet that criteria, and much more. With us today are two professionals who have been closely involved in all aspects of Medicaid, and especially with adult long-term care Medicaid. They will serve as our guides as we explore this topic for all who may be traveling on the living probate train ride. Our first guest is the Director of Advocacy for the ARC of Northern Virginia, where she runs a large grassroots advocacy program, workshops, and offers other free support to people with developmental disabilities and their families trying to find resources to solve problems and plan for the future. Prior to this position, she worked for the ARC of Greater Prince William as a case manager, public guardian, and director of residential services for people with developmental disabilities. She is a graduate of William & Mary and received an MA from George Mason University. Also joining us today is the founder of the Farr Law Firm in Fairfax, Virginia. He specializes in elder law, estate planning, and special needs planning, has authored numerous books and legal treatises in the field of elder law, and teaches classes for attorneys across the country on Medicaid asset protection strategy. He is listed in Super Lawyers and Best Lawyers in America, has earned the prestigious designation of Certified Elder Law Attorney from the National Elder Law Foundation, and was voted by his peers to be a member of the Council of Advanced Practitioners of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Please welcome Lucy Beadnell from the ARC of Northern Virginia and attorney Evan Farr. Guys, thanks for joining us. My God, you guys are so talented. Goodness
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank goodness gracious. Well, let's get right to it. There's different types of Medicaid. Lucy, talk to us a little bit about the types of Medicaid coverage that you see in your advocacy position with the ARC.
Sure. I think when a lot of folks think about Medicaid, they think about the traditional Medicaid as health insurance. So doctor's visits, hospital stays, prescription copays, things of that nature. And in Virginia, you've got to be either at or near the poverty level and also fall into another category. So a pregnant woman, a child, a senior, or a person with a developmental disability or disability of some kind. But right in the original Medicaid statute, written more than 50 years ago, is a big focus on Medicaid being a long-term care support program. And long-term care support, separate from health kind of supports, are things like assistance with bathing or dressing or using the restroom, the kinds of things we all need to do every day and at a certain point in our life may need help to do. So long-term care Medicaid can pay for those kinds of services either in someone's home, so if you wanted to age in place and have someone come in on a routine basis, or in an institutional setting like a nursing home.
Okay. So consistent with the mission of our show, the Probate Nation show, we're going to focus on the adult long-term care Medicaid planning. Now, Evan, when we talk about long-term care Medicaid, what is it exactly that we're asking the government to pay for?
Well, as Lucy mentioned, what we're asking Medicaid to pay for is assistance with our activities of daily living. Most Medicaid dollars are spent paying for people who are in a nursing home. Every state has the ability to ask the federal government for various waiver programs, and we're very lucky in Virginia to have a home care waiver where people can receive help with their activities of daily living at home. We also have an adult daycare model, which is, there are pilot programs throughout the state called the PACE program, which sort of a combination of Medicare and Medicaid, where people receive help with their activities of daily living in a daycare setting.
Okay. So that's well, we're very fortunate then. Virginia has some very, very progressive programs.
We are, and the fact that there's no waiting list for these waivers is also somewhat unique, because in many states, and including our neighbor to the north, Maryland, they have a home care waiver program, but there's years-long waiting list to get on it, so it's relatively useless.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, let's talk a little bit about the qualification criteria. So we want to review the criteria that we need to meet in order to qualify for adult long-term care Medicaid coverage. So Lucy, what is one of the things it talks about is you have to be medically needy. What does that mean?
Sure. So there are lots of folks, especially with aging-related disabilities, who qualify for Medicaid on all fronts, but maybe a little bit over the income cap for Medicaid. But what you can do in that case is look at, is that extra income that's bumping you over the qualification period being spent on qualifying medical expenses? And if so, you can do what's called spending down, and spend down that money on those qualifying medical expenses, and therefore have your income below the Medicaid threshold and be medically eligible for Medicaid.
So medically needy then means that people have the medical need. And that
Exactly
means
right.
There's some definition for that. Well, let's turn to, so you start to talk a little bit about income must be less, and so I know that we talked about this when we're planning for the program. Income must be less than the cost of care. So Evan, talk about what that means.
Well, again, most people who receive long-term care Medicaid are residents of a nursing home. And nursing homes in Northern Virginia run an average of about $10,000 to $12,000 a month.
That's true.
So as long as your income is below the private cost of the nursing home, so let's say you're in a $10,000 a month nursing home, as long as your income is below $10,000 a month, you can get Medicaid. Medicaid will pay for the difference. In other words, you pay your income to the nursing home. Medicaid pays the difference. So the type of Medicaid we're talking about is again, long-term care Medicaid. I also call it middle-class Medicaid because it truly is used primarily by middle-class people who have perhaps significant income in the $3,000 to $7,000 a month range, but they run out of assets within which to pay for their monthly costs.
Sure, that can happen quickly. Let's talk about another criteria is you have to have less than a certain amount of countable assets. What's that number and what are countable assets?
Yeah, what a great question. So that number is the magic $2,000. It's what Medicaid's looking for its ceiling in countable assets, which begs the question, of course, what counts?
Right.
So generally speaking, what counts is money that's both in your name and that you can access, whether or not you're actively accessing it now. So some examples of that would be things like bank accounts, just your regular old checking and savings account combined. Generally speaking, if you have stocks or bonds in your name, those are usually countable assets. Retirement savings accounts, things of that nature, any money set aside that would be tied to you is usually counted by Medicaid. But there are some really significant exceptions that fall outside of the countable domain that allow people to hold a large number of assets. And some examples of those types of things are special needs trusts, which is a special type of trust and savings fund for someone who Social Security deems disabled before the age of 65. You could set that up before 65, and you can hold unlimited amount of assets in those kinds of trusts, including property and stocks and other kinds of things. So people can hold lots of money in those assets. ABLE accounts are relatively new to Virginia. In 2015, they got a lot of attention nationwide. They came to Virginia in late 2016, and you can set that up at any point in the lifespan so long as your disability occurred before age 26. And certainly we have some people who don't start seeking out long-term care services until they're much older and fall into that category. There are some prepaid burial funds. They're irrevocable that you could look at. Some other kinds of little ways to save money. Generally speaking, the home in which you live and the car that you drive or that's primarily used to drive you are not countable assets. But again, these are all things that are really nuanced. You do want to sit down and do some long-term planning to parse through what exactly you have and make sure it's counted or not.
Okay. Well, Evan, so part of the strategy, I know that you and I have talked over the years during our activities about, people want to give money away so they don't have, quote, countable assets, but there's this thing called disqualifying gifts, or that we hear about. Tell me what that means and why that's a barrier to folks, just giving everything away.
Well, giving everything away is a problem because any gifts that are made within 5 years of applying for Medicaid are considered penalized transfers or uncompensated transfers subject to a penalty imposed by Medicaid. There's a formula. Medicaid looks back for 5 years at all the money that you've given away, whether you've given that to a family member, to your church or synagogue or other religious institution, whether you've paid for tuition for a grandchild, whether you put money into an irrevocable asset protection trust. They look back 5 years, all the money that was given away. They divide that number by a penalty divisor, which varies by state, and in Virginia, it varies by where you are in the state. And they come up with a number, which is a period of months of ineligibility for long-term care Medicaid, which can actually exceed 5 years.
Boy, that's harsh. But I guess that will lead us to the next thing, which is there are Medicaid planning strategies that can allow you to deal with these various criteria in a way that fits within the four corners of the law and allows you to make sure that you don't bump up against some of these restrictions. Okay, so I know, Evan, this is right in your wheelhouse. I know you do a lot of planning in this area. First off, when should the planning for this type of Medicaid adult long-term care begin? When should we start planning for this?
Well, there are really two times when people plan for Medicaid long-term care or do engage in the process of Medicaid planning. There's advanced planning and there's at-need planning, sometimes called crisis planning, when people are about to go into a nursing home. So the advanced type of planning that is done is typically putting money into an asset protection trust that's specifically designed to protect your assets, including your house, which is, I know Lucy mentioned, is often exempt, and that's, I think, in part because mostly what she deals with are people who are younger and living at home. And if you're living in your home, your house is temporarily exempt from Medicaid. But if you're in a nursing home, the house in Virginia is not exempt. It's only exempt for the first 6 months that you're in a nursing home. Then it becomes a countable asset. And Medicaid will knock you off if that house has not been previously protected. So we always have to protect the house in Virginia.
Important to know.
Along with all the other accountable assets, which, as Lucy mentioned, is basically everything and anything that can be converted to cash.
So I'm sorry.
Well, one planning technique is to put those assets into the irrevocable trust. And ideally, that's done for young and healthy people with hopefully 5 years to go before they're going to need nursing home care. Of course, you never know if you're going to make the 5 years, and there's ways to protect parts of that money before the 5 years. And then there's the crisis planning, where people who have not done that sort of advanced planning, they'll come to an elder law attorney such as myself to protect as much as they can as quickly as possible so that they don't have to go broke spending all their money in the nursing home because mom just entered the nursing home.
And that's crucial. I know that you sort of alluded to a couple of things, but let's talk about some specifics for a second or two. What about the car? Some planning techniques for the car?
One car is an exempt asset, and it's not per person, it's per person or married couple, because Medicaid treats a married couple as a single economic unit. So if a married couple is applying, or if one spouse is applying for Medicaid, they look at all the assets belonging to the married couple, regardless of how they're titled. So they can have one car, they can have prepaid funeral arrangements if properly established, which Lucy alluded to. There are some other basic strategies that people can use, buying certain types of government savings bonds. You can protect little amounts here and there. But the bigger picture is that there are over 24 different very complex Medicaid asset protection strategies that can be used under the skilled guidance of an experienced elder law attorney, even when someone is already in the nursing home. Whether they're about to go in or have just gone in, or whether they've been in there for 10 years and they've already spent over $1 million on their care, there are still ways to protect, as a general rule, 40 to 70% of someone's assets. If they're single, for married couples, we can protect 100% of assets and get the nursing home spouse on Medicaid.
Now, I know Lucy had mentioned as well that there are these payback trusts, which exists as well, and I guess that's a strategy. But that means that, tell me what that means when people don't understand what that payback trust means.
Well, a payback trust is a special needs trust that is created by an individual under 65 with their own assets. Mm-hmm. And federal law allows this. The problem with that strategy is that any money left in that trust upon that person's death first has to go to pay back Medicaid for all monies that were spent on that person's behalf. So if the person has been in a nursing home for 10 years and Medicaid has paid out $1 million of Medicaid funds, and there's $1 million left in the trust, it's all going to be gone, and there won't be anything left to leave on as an inheritance. And that may be perfectly fine for some people, and
sure,
many people may not have any desire or need to leave an inheritance. So that's certainly a good strategy for many people.
Sure, that's good to know. Let's talk about the actual application process that you would make to Medicaid. So Lucy, can you talk a little bit about what's involved and timing and how difficult it is, and is it something that someone should take on themselves?
It depends on how confident you are. In reality, Evan has spoken so much about the importance of really taking a broad look at what your assets are and protecting things, and mentioning kind of that 5-year look back period. So if you're someone who is thinking, well, I'm probably going to need services in the next year or two, but 4 years ago I gave away the farm trying to protect my assets, I would say it's worth talking to someone and figuring out, does it make sense to wait another year to apply, so we're out of that 5-year look back range for when you gave away those assets, those kinds of things. As Evan mentioned too, plenty of people come into this situation actively in crisis and needing services and supports, and at that point really there is no choice but to go ahead and apply. But as soon as you start thinking this may be something that's in your future, it's a really wise thing to do, to sit down and take a whole look at the person and the assets and where they would like to age, the kind of care we're anticipating they're going to need, and start looking through things. In Virginia, you can still apply for Medicaid on paper, or you can apply online through our Common Help is the name of the website, so it's commonhelp.virginia.gov. I get lots of calls about the Medicaid application with all sorts of people saying, do I have to fill this part out? It doesn't seem relevant to me. This is very confusing. Generally speaking, having talked with a lot of long-term care eligibility workers who really process those applications on the other side, the best practical advice I can give is fill out the application as completely and thoroughly as you can, because you don't want to get held up on the other side with then going back to retrieve documents that you thought, oh, I don't have those right now, I'll go ahead and put this application off in the mail or submit it online, and then your application's not going to end up being processed because you're not going to be able to generate them. You really want all your ducks in a row, both in terms of planning and documentation and your ability to answer all those kinds of questions about your assets and your income and expenses, especially medical expenses. We talked about the medically needy population. That's going to be important to show. All those kinds of things. So once you turn in that Medicaid application, the long-term care eligibility worker has 45 calendar days to process it. And in my experience, they generally run pretty close to that. But if they get back to you at day 40 and ask you a whole bunch of questions, you don't have documentation to back up, then you're going to have a real significant slowdown in receiving that Medicaid.
Okay, so we need to be prepared and get it together completely before you submit the application. Now, we've seen a lot of the news, Evans, over the last several years about people are planning for Medicaid and trying to qualify for Medicaid. And a lot of people have called into question the ethics of trying to get the government to pay for your long-term care. Can you talk a little bit about the ethics behind Medicaid planning?
Absolutely. That's a subject I'm actually very passionate about. The concept of Medicaid planning, in my mind and in the mind of all elder law attorneys I know, is completely ethical, completely legal, of course. We never hide assets. That's a dirty four-letter word in our business. We are using legal and ethical strategies for people to protect assets. And the first thing to understand is when I talk about asset protection, it's not typically about preserving an inheritance for the children. It's about setting aside assets that in a protected fashion so that those assets can be used to help care, typically for an aging parent or grandparent, to make their life better. So if they're in the nursing home, there's money that's been set aside and protected, whether it's in a special needs trust or whether it's protected via one of the 24 other strategies that I help people with every day. And that money can be used to pay for things that Medicaid doesn't cover, like replacing lost or broken hearing aids, eyeglasses, dentures, or paying for a private sitter to be with mom or dad to help them get to the bathroom every 2 hours so they don't wind up sitting in dirty diapers for 4 hours a day, as is so often the fate of many, if not most, residents in nursing homes. So that's fundamentally the purpose of Medicaid asset protection, is to preserve the dignity and quality of life of the elders that are the clients that I serve as a certified elder law attorney. So, and back to the ethics, there's really two things that I think most people can understand and relate to, and that is that it's very similar, almost identical really, to income tax planning. What everybody does April 15th, they try to maximize their income tax deductions and credits so they can get back the biggest tax refund that they're allowed to. And Medicaid planning is the same thing. If you're smart enough to plan and set up your legal and financial affairs using an elder law attorney to get back Medicaid dollars, which you have paid your whole life in the form of taxes, assuming you or your spouse or both of you have worked your whole life, then you've paid a huge amount of money to the federal and state government to pay for Medicaid, which is one of the two largest budget line items at the federal and state level, and Medicaid being a 50-50 federal-state program right now. So if you're smart enough to plan your affairs to get some of that money back to pay for your long-term care when it's needed, how is that any different from maximizing your income tax deductions? I submit it's not. And the other big ethical issue is that people need to do Medicaid asset protection in order to level the playing field when it comes to getting the wrong type of illness. And what I mean by the wrong type of illness is there are many types of illnesses that our American health insurance system discriminate against, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other diseases where the care that's needed because of the disease you have is help with bathing and dressing and eating and getting to the bathroom and using the toilet. That's the care you need because of the disease you have. Just like if you have cancer, the care you need because of that disease is chemotherapy and radiation and surgery. The health insurance covers that type of care. So that's the good type of disease. Of course, not good, but the right type from a financial standpoint. Families don't typically have to go broke if they have the right type of disease. Why is it fair that they have to go broke when their family or their loved one develops Alzheimer's or some other type of dementia or has a stroke where they need help with other things in their life?
Those are good points. This has been really very, very interesting, and each of you have different perspectives and provide great information for this. Some final thoughts, Lucy, you want to share with our audience?
Sure. I would just say it's never too early to start thinking about this in some form or fashion. If you live long enough, everybody's going to have a disability. So sitting down with someone to look at what you have and what you're likely to need as soon as you have inklings about that is a really wise thing to do, both as Evan mentioned, for the quality of life of the person with an aging-related disability or other disability and the family members.
Evan, briefly, some final comments.
Well, I would just echo Lucy's comments and also explain, as a estate planning attorney for my entire 30 years in practice, I realized about 17 years ago that I was doing a disservice to my clients just doing estate planning, because the best estate plan in the world is useless if you ignore your long-term care planning. Because if you have a wonderful estate plan yet you die broke because you've been in a nursing home for 10 years, what's the point of a great estate plan? So you have to address, in my mind, both estate planning and long-term care planning, at least for people over 65 or those who have any kind of disabilities.
Well, Evan, Lucy, thank you so very much for spending the time talking with us about this very, very important topic. It's been a great, very informative, and a great public service to the folks in Northern Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. You're very welcome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, without a doubt, handling the finances for an aging adult as a conservative can be challenging. And nothing can be more nerve-wracking than figuring out how to pay for the long-term care needs of that aging adult who has limited resources and in many cases does not have long-term care insurance. There are many resources available to help educate and guide you to the Medicaid maze of do's and don'ts to obtain adult long-term care Medicaid in Virginia. In some cases, you may be able to navigate that maze on your own or with the assistance of organizations like the ARC of Northern Virginia. But often, you will need to hire an attorney who specializes in Medicaid to both structure and implement a plan for Medicaid qualification. What I take away from this program is that there are options that can be pursued to qualify for Medicaid. You just need to recognize early the need for legal assistance so that the long-term care planning for adult long-term care Medicaid can be done before a crisis occurs. This brings us to the conclusion of our show. We hope you found it helpful. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.